1470 is the year. A bell in the Thessaly mountains rings across a valley one last time. That won't ever hear it again. Within the convent of St. Catherine, 23 ladies, in prayer, their lips move in, collectively creating the words they've said. For years, every morning. However, the words taste different in the morning, similar to like farewell. The vista beyond the stone walls bleeds crimson, not at dawn but from the flags of an empire that has already engulfed entire kingdoms. The Ottoman army does not march, erasing like a torrent of fire and steel all that comes in its way. The abbess, Sister Ilani, holds a silver crucifix that has withstood 3 generations. Her hands shake but not out of terror. She is aware of what is about to happen. They all do. They are unaware of what no one could have predicted, that death would have been a blessing. Because none of the history books you read in school included the events that followed. Up until today, it was concealed by centuries of silence, erased, and buried. The Ottomans' treatment of these women went beyond simple conquest. It was much more deliberate. Anything that historians are just now starting to figure out. Your ability to deal with the facts is not the question. It depends on your willingness to recall it. You've come to the right place if you've ever wondered why some historical tales disappear while others are recounted repeatedly. We delve into the archives that the world has forgotten here on Crimson Historians. Testimonies stored in Vatican vaults, missionary correspondence, and Ottoman governmental documents. We are able to bring one more voice out of the shadows with each view. Like and subscribe. The bell has stopped ringing, and the doors are about to break, so let's return to the convent. You must comprehend the mechanism that devoured these nuns in order to comprehend what transpired with them. Constantinople had fallen 17 years prior, in 1453 at the jewel of Christendom, the city that had represented nearly 1,000 years, gone in 53 days. Of blood and cannon fire. The Hagia Sophia, formerly the most magnificent cathedral in the world, was shorn of its crosses. A few hours after the victory, its bells were covered in mosaics, melted down. Within a week, the call to hymns reverberated from its domes of prayer. Has been singing for 9 centuries. Sultan Mehmed II was positioned in the nave of the historic church and proclaimed it a not because he required another location of worship after he recognized something that most conquerors don't slaughter a people to beat them. By eliminating who they are, you beat them. The Ottomans did not merely subjugate land, they overcame identity. Mehmed saw wounds that would not heal when he turned to face the dispersed ruins of the Byzantine civilization in the West. Every cross that cast shadows on captured territory, every church bell that continued to ring, and every monastery that remained intact. These were proclamations, acts of rebellion, evidence that the old world would not perish. Additionally, each nun who continued to pray in Latin served as a living example of how faith might defeat armies. Thus, the Sultan came to a decision. They will vanish if they don't convert. Not by slaughter. Martyrs are created by massacres. Resistance is inspired by martyrs. They write songs. They tell stories. The dead get immortality. Something much more refined had been perfected by the Ottomans. Something that left behind no memories, stories, or melodies. Erasure. This tactic had been used throughout the empire by 1470. Greek monasteries in Morea, Armenian churches in Anatolia, Serbian convents throughout the Balkans. Not all of them were burned. Some were converted, while others were left behind. However, the pattern remained constant. The offer was made first. After that, there was stillness, situated on a mountainside in Thessaly, far from any garrison or ally. The convent of St. Catherine was set to become yet another test case, a footnote in the growth of an empire. However, these women were unaware that they were footnotes. They weren't combatants. These were women who had lived their entire lives in prayer and solitude. They used rosaries as weapons. Their religions served as their armor. The majority of them had never held a blade, seen a soldier, or thought they would have to. For 12 years, Sister Llewellyn had been an abbreviation. Prior to that, she cared for the sick in a community that had been destroyed by the plague in 1448. She arrived at the monastery to make sense of the world rather than to flee it. Magdalena, the sister, was 19. Just 2 years prior, she had taken her vows. The calluses from her father's farm were still visible on her hands. After her family was slaughtered in a raid, she became a member of the convent. Since then, she had only felt secure in the convent. Sister Theodorus was 70 years old. She had survived more wars than she could remember, an emperor and 2 abbesses. Decades ago, her fear of dying had subsided. However, none of them had ever encountered this. You may be missing the lesson our predecessors died to impart if this historical moment doesn't inspire you to learn more that refusing to forget who you are is the riskiest thing you can do when confronted with authority. Let's now observe what occurs when empire and faith collide. Shortly after dawn, the first cannonball is fired. The chapel is not hit by it. It hits the bell tower. It's an apocalyptic sound. Stone bursts into the sky. Iron screams at other iron. The bell, which has been ringing every morning for 140 years, breaks in midair and the fragments fall onto the courtyard where the sisters cultivate medicinal herbs. The hands that took care of those plants are now terrified and covering their ears. Sister Llewellyn doesn't let out a cry. With her cross aloft, she rises up and starts to sing. Lord have compassion, the Kyrie Ellis. The others follow her, one by one. Against the din of an empire, 23 voices emerged. However, songs are not listened to by empires. The gates are breached by noon. The courtyard is filled with Ottoman soldiers. Not with swords drawn, but with ink pots, quills, and ledges. They are not conquerors. Rather, they move through the convent like clerks, cataloging, documenting, and counting. Because these women were considered assets rather than human beings by the Ottomans. A translator comes forward. There lived a Greek man in these hills. You can hear the shame hidden in every syllable as he reads from a scroll, his voice trembling. Sultan Mehmed II ordered that the subjects of the conquered provinces surrender to the Sublime's rule. Protection will be given to those who convert. Those who resist will suffer the repercussions of disobedience. Sister Eleni advances. Her expression is placid, almost tranquil. She speaks to the interpreter in Greek so clearly that everyone can understand, rather than the soldiers. Inform your sultan that a king has already received our life. Nothing remains for us to give up. The commanding officer, Hasan Pasha, whose name can be found in Ottoman military documents from the 1470th Thessalian campaign, did not react angrily. Because he is aware of something the nuns do not yet comprehend, he answers with something even more terrifying, a smile. The skill of breaking people without killing them has been mastered by the Ottomans. The women are confined to their own chapel that evening. There was nothing to eat or drink, just darkness and the sounds of soldiers eating, laughing, and living outside while they waited to see who would break first. 2 younger sisters from Corinth start crying in the corner. The stone walls reverberate with their tears. However, Sister Magdalena, who is only 20 years old, starts whispering a psalm, "My shepherd is the Lord. I won't desire it." Next, another. "Even so, I stroll through in the shadow of death's valley I will. Do not be afraid of evil." Then one more, and gradually, the crying ceases. This is the time. They were undervalued by the Ottomans. The women had lived their whole lives, getting ready for pain, vigils and fasting, hours of solitude in the cold, surrender to something bigger than themselves. What the soldiers perceived as the nuns considered torture to be their everyday self-control. However, Hasan Pasha has patience. This is nothing new to him. In Maria Wakia, amid the Serbian ruins, monasteries where monks believed they would be saved by faith that he once remarked, "Faith is like a candle," in a letter to the Sultan that is still kept in the highest archives of the Topkapi palace. Right before it dies, it flames brightest. He is going to put that theory to the test. The doors open on the second day. A servant comes in carrying water and bread, genuine food and pure water. Without saying anything, he puts it down and walks away. The nuns gaze at it, They have hollow stomachs and dry throats. With desperation in their eyes, the younger sisters turn to face Ilani. The oldest, Sister Theodoris, speaks first. They want us to accept it, feel appreciative, and become softer. Elaine gives a nod. After that, we fast. The food is not touched by them. Their lips are bleeding and damaged on the third day. Their hands tremble. The youngest sisters are hardly able to stand, yet they manage to stay intact. With his arms folded, Hassan Pasha observes from the courtyard. He is impressed, irritated, and maybe briefly shows signs of respect. However, respect doesn't alter tactics. The doors reopen on the third day. It's not a servant this time. It's Hassan. His language is Turkish, and the interpreter trails him like a shadow. Are not criminals. You are not adversaries. You're just wrong. The Sultan is compassionate. He offers you protection, new names, and new lives. Speaking the words is all that is required. Quiet. Alternatively, you could accompany us to Constantinople. Your matter will be heard by the Sultan personally there. Your conviction might inspire him. He takes a moment to process the information, but the weak do not make it through the long journey. It is a promise rather than a threat. Sister Ilelin examines her sisters. Some are hardly conscious at all. Some people are closing their eyes while they pray. Some are gazing at the ground in an attempt to get power from the stone. She looks back at Hassan. We're going to stroll. His face lights up again. Excellent. At morning, we depart. The nuns cling to one another in the dark that night. Sister Magdalena starts to humble herself, but no one else says anything. During Vespers, they sang a hymn. The others follow her one by one. The soldiers hear it outside. A few of them hesitate. A few of them turn their heads. Years later, one of them would tell his grandson about the women who sung themselves to death. However, that tale will also be forgotten. For now, the hymn floats through the chapel's wall fissures. Out into the darkness. A proclamation, an appeal, or a prayer. We're still here. On the fourth day, they depart at sunrise. 23 women were heading south towards the coast with their wrists bound with rope. There are only their feet, the dust, and the merciless sun, no carts or horses. They are not hurried by the military. They are not required to. The punishment is the road itself. Sister Irene passes out after the second day. She is 62. For years, her knees have been weakening. Her legs won't support her when she tries to stand. The soldiers don't hold off. She is carried for the remaining 3 miles by Sister Magdalena and Sister Anna, another nun. Irene is unconscious when they eventually halt for the night. She's gone by sunrise. They use their hands to bury her at the side of the road. Whispered prayers and dirt, no ceremony, no tools. The soldiers observe. They fail to stop them. In his ledger, Hassan Pasha makes a note. There are 22 left. It occurs once more on the fourth day. Sister Callista just stops moving. She hasn't said anything since the siege. She closes her eyes, takes a seat in the middle of the road, and stays there. They abandon her there. Only 18 are left when they arrive at the port of Volos 7 days later. However, there was an incident on that route. Something the Ottomans were not prepared for. The nuns ceased crying and pleading. They strolled silently. However, it wasn't the quiet of defeat. It was the stillness of ladies who had already decided what to do. Even with her wrists bound, Sister Eleni had been leading the group by strolling at the front of the queue. However, Hassan Pasha summons her early on the 6th day. She was taken to his tent by herself. Ottoman records don't explain what happens next. A letter from a Venetian merchant who saw the aftermath describes it. A letter found in the Dravnik archives in 2003. I saw them bring her back at dawn, he writes. She was unable to walk. God pardon me, but even if her eyes were open, she was no longer inside of them. She was paraded through the camp as a convert while wearing silk clothing. However, I could hear her lips moving as I got close. She continued to softly pray in Latin. She was unbroken. Her body had just been seized. And let her spirit roam. This is the Ottoman tactics that history doesn't instruct you. Martyrs were not what they desired. Resistance is inspired by martyrs. Songs are written, tales are shared, and the deceased turn becoming saints. They desired ghosts, women who would never be complete again, even though they could walk, talk, eat, and breathe. Living evidence of the futility of revolt. Anyone who believed that faith could resist imperialism should be warned. Sister Ilelin accompanied them on their trek to the coast. But she didn't say anything more. Never met someone's eyes. Although she was present, she wasn't. When they saw her, the younger sisters started crying. The elderly simply prayed more fervently. They are loaded into a galley at the port of Volos. A huge warship with chains fastened to the wood and rows of benches. It's not a passenger ship. This vessel is meant to be controlled. Cargo, convicts, and slaves. The nuns' wrists are bound to iron rings and they are shackled to the benches. They are listed by number rather than name in a ship's manifest that was found at Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum in 1987. 18 female religious prisoners were sent to the imperial household for domestic duty and conversion. A lot of work is being done by that term service. 12 days make up the cruise. The ocean is cruel. The deck is lashed by storms. Their cracked lips are stung by salt spray. The ship rolls and pitches. Until nothing remains, the women who have never seen the ocean throw up. Sister Magdalena, the youngest, murmurs prayers under her breath at night. Her voice is so weak that it can hardly be heard over the roaring waves. However, the other inmates, Greeks, Italians, Serbs, and men and women shackled next to them, turn to listen. The sea seemed to pause for a moment. The sisters witness the emergence of Constantinople's skyline as the ship eventually approaches the Bosphorus. Domes, minarets, and walls that appear to go on forever. The city shines like a blade in the early morning light. It had been referred to as the city for centuries. It would now serve as a cage for the world's desires. They marched from the docks through winding streets crowded with slaves, soldiers, and merchants. People paused to gaze. Even in a conquest-based empire, Christian nuns are rare among the prisoners. This is not typical. They are guided past the historic walls, via the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sing and peacocks cry out, and then in the dark of Hagia Sophia, the magnificent church that is presently a mosque, they must halt to get on your knees. As the invitation to prayer reverberates from one of the sisters, the minarets. We're home, but it's no longer ours. They are brought to the palace, but not to the opulent chambers. To the courtyards where ambassadors stroll and vassars plot. They have been taken beneath spiraling stone steps, down odorous passages and into darkness, introducing moisture and deterioration to a location that doesn't have an official existence. A part of you understands that this story must be told, which is why you're still watching. Get Crimson Historians as a subscription. For them, not for us. For the voices that the silence muffled. Let's now follow them into the shadows. There is a system of tunnels beneath Topkapi Palace that visitors are never able to see. There are servant quarters, storage rooms, and forgotten passageways that meander like veins into the bedrock. And in the farthest corner, a room with no formal use that has been closed off for generations. Archaeologists breached a false wall in 2011 while doing restoration work. They were shocked to see dozens of tiny rudimentary crosses fashioned with fingernails or fragments of shattered pottery, scraped into the stone and almost noticeable. Beneath the Latin-inscribed crosses, 4 words appear in tenebris lucet. In the shadows, the light glows. Their chapel was located here. These women worked as silent servants underneath the palace for months or even years, cleaning floors, washing linens, and tending fires for apartments they would never enter. However, they congregated in this abandoned room and prayed at night when the palace slept. They had only their memories, no altar, no Bible, and no priest. They transformed half-forgotten lines into prayers that kept them alive by reciting psalms from memory. They whispered songs so softly that the stone could hardly hear them. They used water from the palace wells and bread pilfered from the kitchens for communion. With the knowledge that no one would ever see it, they engraved their faith into stone, one scratch at a time. Among them was Sister Magdalena. On the ship, the girl had whispered psalms. Who had transported Sister Irene. Who, upon returning Sister Ilani in silk, had not turned aside. In the shadows, she became their voice. Her mark was also discovered by the archaeologists. A tiny bird made scratches in the wall's corner. There were 23 lines next to it, one for each sister, but only 11 of them were finished. The remainder faded into silence. They made altar cloths out of scraps of linen and candle holders out of shattered earthenware. From a fragment of a broken mirror, they created a rudimentary cross. Within, they assembled in this hidden chapel, each night following the palace's slumber. Not a hymn. Whispers only, no sermons. Every lady shared a recollection while kneeling, the warmth of bread before dawn, her house, and the church bell. These recollections turned into their own hymns, modest sacrifices to a God who continued to hear them in the shadows. In 1478, a Venetian prisoner who was being imprisoned in the palace for ransom described hearing weird voices beneath the harem. Latin-speaking women singing to a god outside of this empire. Before discovering the chapel, historians wrote it up as superstition for ages. Here's what hurts your feelings, though. The crosses come to an end. The scratches become irregular and urgent halfway through the wall. The lines seem to be cut with greater hurry and intensity as they get deeper. Nothing after that. A purge of the palace staff under the new sultan is mentioned in Ottoman archives from 1482. Anyone thought to be unproductive or uncooperative was eliminated. One line in a ledger written in neat Ottoman script, no names, no burial locations, no details, was thrown away. The St. Catherine nuns disappeared from the annals of history. Their chapel was still there, but the 18 ladies who had trekked through hell for 7 days, crossed the sea in chains, and engraved prayers onto stone in the dark were no longer there. In 1712, a French diplomat wrote about an ancient palace servant rumor that on some evenings, if you stood in the lower rooms, the air would get chilly and you could hear women singing in Latin if you paid close attention. He wrote it off as superstition and the stupid ideas of ignorant servants. The walls, however, are truthful. When the archaeologists took a closer look at the church in 2011, they discovered something different. Traces of wax from a different, older source. Candles manufactured by nuns in convents, mixed with herbs rather than Ottoman candles. This indicates that they remained vigilant for a longer period of time than anyone had anticipated. Carving crosses, saying prayers, and refusing to vanish for months or even years. The final imprint on the wall was Sister Magdalena's bird. It was scratched so lightly next to it that it nearly disappeared. "We endure" is 2 Greek words. In actuality, though, they accomplished more than simply survive. Empires were unable to erase what they had left behind. A room filled with crosses, a stone prayer, evidence that faith might endure in the face of chains and walls. After 600 years of conquest and dominance, the Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922. However, those scrapes on the wall were ultimately what survived. Not the silk they used to outfit Sister Ilani, not Hassan Pasha's ledgers, not the Sultan's directives. The world forgot just 4 Latin words that were created by women. Lux et tenebris luce. The darkness is illuminated by the light. Why is this story important, then? Since it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the Ottomans. It's about what happens when individuals refuse to go away and what happens when power tries to eradicate them. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire existed. They took control of 3 continents. They rewrote entire cultures, languages, and maps. They converted Christendom's largest cathedral into a mosque. From the gates of Vienna to the Arabian deserts, they reigned. However, they were unable to remove the 18 women who carved prayers into stone. Consider that an army-based empire, cannons, limitless riches, and the desire to change the world in opposition to women using only faith and fingernails. Moreover, women did not triumph in the manner of empires. Quantify success. They didn't take back their convent. They failed to convert their prisoners. They did not survive to witness liberty. However, they made an impression. The past is authored by the winners. However, memory. The survivors write their memories. Moreover, survival can occasionally resemble a cross, etched in the shadows where nobody was expected to witness it. a hushed prayer. In a language that the conquerors attempted to quiet. A stone was scratched by a bird to recall the sisters who perished. Centuries. Even so, we eventually located it. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, wrote philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Even in the gloom, these women continued to live. Knowing they might not make there, they hiked for 7 days. Knowing what awaited them on the other side, they traveled across the sea in chains. Knowing they might never see sunshine again, they sank into tunnels beneath a palace. Nevertheless, they carved their prayers, believing that one day someone would look back and discover them. You did just that. One of the archaeologists voiced a question that still bothers me in 2011 while they were standing in that secret chapel and gazing at those crosses. What was the duration of their vigil? Years are suggested by the wax marks. Some carvings are so deep that they appear to be the result of intense, persistent effort. This indicates that these women met year after year, night after night, in complete darkness, and they continued to hold on to their faith. They continued carving even after sisters vanished, the scratches on the wall stopped increasing, and hope ought to have died. That goes beyond faith. That is the epitome of disobedience. The Ottoman Empire was disbanded in 1922. Dust is its sultan. Its armies are a thing of the past. Although it is now a museum, the palace still stands. Unaware of what lay beneath their feet, tourists take pictures as they go through its halls. However, those crosses still exist. And even after 500 years, the Latin phrase is still audible. Lux in lucet tenebris. In the shadows, the light glows. It comes from John's Gospel. A poem about unquenchable light. About a truth that endures despite the loss of everything else. Knowing that she would never leave that palace, that her name would be forgotten, and that the world would go on without her, Sister Magdalena etched those words. Nevertheless, she carved them because she grasped a concept that empires never do. Land is something you can conquer. History can be changed. It is possible to bury bodies in unmarked graves and remove names from ledgers. However, what people carry inside of them cannot be killed. Furthermore, what they chisel into stone cannot be silenced. You've just seen one of the saddest realities in history. Subscribe to Crimson Historians to preserve the past if tales like this serve as a reminder of how frail mankind is and how quickly voices can be silenced. Because certain voices, particularly those who were stifled centuries ago, should be heard. It was intended for the nuns of St. Catherine to vanish. That was the strategy. In Ottoman ledgers, they could be erased, broken, transformed into ghosts, converted, or footnotes. However, they did not vanish. In the chapel that archaeologists discovered 500 years later, they are still present in those crosses in that Latin phrase. And because you paid attention, they are now here with you. Since you recalled. Due to your refusal to accept their silence as the last word. Lux interbris lucer. The darkness has not triumphed over the light, which shines through it.